Welcome, Bitcoiners. Welcome. Sunny day. Bitcoin's running. All that's left is to have a coffee. Talk about all the things that are new. Espresso today. We love it. Huge espresso fans. Good morning, David. Good morning. Good morning. And Kevin with the May the Force be with you. Indeed, Kevin. Indeed. May the Force be with you too. We love the Force. Good morning, Count. And good morning, Boo Boo Bodacious. Good morning. What a lovely day, Joe. Indeed, what a lovely day. I'm going to be visiting an aquarium today. I'm looking forward to aquariums. I get a little, sometimes the glass and all that doesn't make me feel great. But it makes me at least not feel as bad as what I just read. So I'm going to share a major health warning with you all this morning, guys. I might save your life right now. I might save your life. It might be me saving your life right now. It turns out, now, I'm lost, so I'll just explain it to you. I'm going to die like today, I just read, because this is some Moscow time stuff. And this is from the Leicester Mercury. It's, I guess, in the United Kingdom, a rare contributor to Moscow time here on the Breakup. But what they said this morning makes me think I don't have much time left. So here's what it comes down to. A major health warning to anyone with a wood-burning stove in their home. This is a major health warning. Alarms. I'm warning you all. I'm warning you. Be careful. Right? Here's what they say. Wood burners are linked to nearly 50% of people's exposure to cancer-causing chemicals. Oh my gosh. I grew up with a wood stove in Quebec. I basically died months ago. This is probably all a simulation. I grew up with it. It's 50% of cancer-causing exposure in your life comes from a wood stove. Jeez, what was I doing? Right? Now, I even had a propane. Get this. This is the kind of crazy lifestyle I had. I had a propane stove to cook and a wood stove to heat. How did we live? I'm surprised I don't spread cancer. I'm surprised I didn't make an airborne cancer from all the stuff that I've experienced. So if you have a wood stove out, be very careful. According to the Leicester Mercury. But I guess, there's all kinds of air, and we're worried about propane stoves, like we heard, right? Propane not going to make it. Wood stove make it, right? In my native city of Montreal, this is how amazing Canadians can be. Right? Talk about how amazing Canadians are a lot on this show. You know what they did to save the world, right? I'm sure Greta the only thing that would make Greta happy in the world. So, bagels, like New York has bagels. Well, Montreal also has bagels, right? And Montreal bagels were kind of famous, right? People love Montreal bagels. What made Montreal different was they weren't boiled and then fried and sent to the place where you got them. They were actually made in open fire wood ovens. And they're totally a different bagel, right? Here's the bagel continuum on earth. Here's how you know, as someone who lived in New York and Montreal, the actual hierarchy, right? The number one bagels in the world are those Montreal bagels fresh out of the oven. The minute you get them out of that wood oven, an hour, there's nothing else in the world like it. After that, they kind of go stale pretty quick. So you got to eat them that day. And then after, you got to toast them, and it's totally different beast. So the New York bagel is, for consistency's sake, the best bagel in the world, because you don't have to toast it. It's still good a day later. You don't have to oven. But Montreal is so clever, right? You know what they did? They banned, because they had to save the world from global warming. And we had 8 fires going constantly in Montreal. About 8 different places that did in the city, in the island Montreal. There were about 8 different. There's not that many. There was open fires that made all of our bagels every day, and they're illegal. Thankfully, they got rid of that, because it was really, really, like, I'd say, the world is just like one more wood fire going, and it was over. But Montreal did it, right? They banned them. So one of our great cultural traditions, we didn't need that. We're going to save the world. How much better is saving the world than a couple bagels? Gosh, who cares, right? Just get the New York bagels. We don't need our unique bagels that were different from anyone else's bagels. We don't need those. They're stupid, right? We got rid of the fires. We no longer need to make fresh bagels out of a fire. We saved the world. Maybe that's what they say, right? That's what they say. That's what they say back in Montreal. So now, because everyone's so concerned about the quality of air and exposure, right? And we've taken care of the big thing. We've taken care of the propane things. We got all kinds of people talking about that. Banned the bagels in Montreal. Made a huge difference. 7 or 8 fires a day, like I said, it's a lot of, they're like, they take up a whole like pizza oven, right? Imagine there was like 8 pizza ovens in Rome or Paris. Imagine that. Whew. I think they're still going, right? And yet they installed $4.5 million Jacques Cartier beers. I like those lights. But the bagels, get real. Get to those bagels, right, with the fire. So good thing they've taken care of almost all our air quality, right? It looks, but because whatever's going on right now in Ohio, I don't know if you guys have heard about what's going on in Ohio. It's nothing compared to the bagels and the fire that makes them. So what's going on in Ohio, I get this both from Aaron Brockovich and a fella named Nick. Nick Drum went to chemical engineering school and is involved in chemical spills. So he knows what goes into cleaning up a chemical spill and how it could be dangerous. So what he says here is, so what happened was there was about 5 or 6 train cars in Ohio that had an accident, and the local authorities thought it would be the best idea to burn off the stuff that leaked out. And it turns out that what was there is called, what the heck is it called again? Titanium something. Anyway, it's super hazardous. Right? I wrote it down. Let me just see what it's important, right? It's polyvinyl chloride, right? So polyvinyl chloride. And if you haven't seen it, there are these plumes of dark, thick smoke just coming out of Ohio. And they've really blanketed a whole of the sky in that area. And all the birds had to fly away. So there's these huge flocks of crows getting out of the way. There's people taking pictures of the sky above saying, this isn't a storm system. The black clouds above us are just pollution from this train accident. And Nick goes to explain the information laundering process around this. Because he's trained in chemicals, so much about bagels and the 7 going that they had to ban in Montreal to make sure we didn't have wood bagels anymore, and also the Leicester mercury, worrying about all our wood stoves and how that's actually half of all the cancer exposure we'll get in our lifetimes, right? So this guy only boring chemical spills, like it's not as dangerous as a propane stove. And here's what he says. So first of all, and he goes into the information laundering part of what we're discussing here. So it's the Southern Railway that owns this rail car track, the rail cars and track that had the accident. Because don't worry about it, right? They played down the reality of the situation. It's no big deal, right? And then right away, the politician agreed and said, don't worry about it, right? It's fine. We cleaned it up. We burned it away. The news reported on what the politician said about what the railroad said. I live in an area near a town in Canada called Lac-Mégantic. And the whole town years ago, because they were shipping oil, and they wouldn't in Quebec let them build a pipeline. So they said, ship it by rail because then there's no leaks and it'll be fine. Well, the train got into a bit of trouble and the whole thing blew up and put a crater into the town and everybody died and it's all gone. So it's pretty sad. At least they didn't build the pipeline and then have a constant stream that couldn't be fixed here and there, right? They still run it on train, and that's what's going on. And the same thing happened, right? Whose fault was it? A little bit difficult around the investigations. The company who was responsible, the Montreal, Maine, and Atlantic Rail, just said, well, we have no money, we're going to go bankrupt. So another one bought them, and that was the end of it, right? That was the end of it. So this guy here, Nick D. Rom, underlines, right, exactly what happened with this chemical spill. So in this place in East Palestine, Ohio, the train crashed. Local authorities purposely actually burns at a really low temperature, like 10 degrees. It doesn't take much. So it all went up, right? A huge plume cloud. And what he explains is the result now is that this is the chemical cocktail that will create acid rain at a scale that we haven't seen in a long time. This could be seen from space, by the way. It was so big. I've seen pictures. It's a big black mark over Ohio. enormous. And so luckily, right, we already did the important things for the air. We bagel fires, and we got rid of, or at least started the conversation on the propane stoves. Hopefully that's cleaned up soon. So we don't have to worry too much about this East Ohio or East Palestine, Ohio thing. And that's why, one of the reasons why no one's talking about it, right? It just seems to be blown over, right? Blowing away from where it is, billowing. But what are people talking about today? So, Aaron Brockovich, I'm trying to gather information on this very serious situation in Ohio involving a train derailment with hazardous chemicals. What I will say is this: trust your eyes, ears, and nose, and get the hell if your senses are telling you to. No one's been banned from this area. No one's been told to leave. No one has said it's too dangerous. One moment. Okay, so it looks like there's no reason to talk about it, right? And it looks like no one is talking about it, and sort of distracted, because what is everyone talking about? What has been the main subject in America for the past 24 hours? It's UFOs. The CNN reporters talking about how Alaska was the site of a UFO being shot down. There was another one shot down in Canada, and another one sighted over Montana. Everyone talking about these UFOs now. And what do we know about UFOs? Well, not too much. Might be balloons. We haven't heard much about it, right? But we know a bit of the history of this UFO stuff. So first of all, Murray, Rothbard, 1776, right? UFOs are a distraction from Pfizer, the U.S. blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, big tech companies coordinating with the FBI, U.S. Intel to steer Americans and influence elections, the Epstein client list, deadly chemical release in East Palestine, Ohio. And Robert Skvarla gives a breakdown of when UFOs have been seen in America over the years. We even had Sticks, Hex, and Hammers, a regular here, talking about how this actually reminds more of the, let me find the exact quote because it's pretty funny. Sticks is pretty good for these kinds of quotes. Let me see what he had here. I had saved it, but not in the right order, apparently. Just a minute. Where did I put it? Sticks, where are you, Sticks? Where's your good stuff? All right. Well, Sticks says, if I could find it properly, he had a few quotes, and I have them here, but not the good one. Anyway, so Sticks says, basically, it reminds him more of the 1950s and the early atomic area with McCarthyism going on and these other issues. So he comes in and says the shoot down of the presumptive balloon in Alaska yesterday nullifies legacy media propaganda claims that it is really difficult to shoot high balloons down. Then they said the legacy media will definitely avoid asking Joey, that's Joe Biden, why this object wasn't a risk to shoot an area that it was supposedly shot down. If craft in the skies is dangerous and hard, why is it not dangerous and hard, right? So talking again about the liar, pants on fire aspect. And, lots of attention now being given to the balloon, and Sticks, Hex, and Hammer goes into that history about that 1950 of UFO observation spike, right? So there's a bit of a story to it. So Robert Skvarla underlines it all. Here he says, anyone notice how UFOs seem to appear whenever America is in need of an enemy? For example, the first surge in popularity was from 1960, coinciding with the rise of post-World War II Cold War propaganda. The Soviet Union soon emerged as America's chief. UFOs wouldn't surge in popularity again until the mid-70s, a time when America entered détente with the Soviet Union and opened relations with China. Interest grew as the country faced internal conflicts. Vietnam over, Nixon gone, and the Church Committee in the news. These aliens were sometimes lighted, however. Think UFOs trading Giorgio Moroder samples with scientists and close the third kind. There was a strain of utopianism present culturally for a moment, and many cults formed in this period. But this intergalactic Eden wouldn't last. While E.T. appeared in 1982, our old enemy was simply hiding in plain sight. The Sun announced the Soviet Union was the evil empire. Americans would fight a shape-shifting reptilian menace in V. There's also something to be said in ET being our government, an idea that had been developing around this time thanks to ufologists like Bill Moore and his cosmic Watergate. Another brief release, again, UFOs didn't disappear entirely. They occasionally drop from the skies onto broadcast via programs like Unsolved Mysteries. Then something funny happened in 1991. 2 months before America's longtime rival, the Soviet Union, dissolved, the Fox network aired a special TV show, UFO news program called Sightings. It did massive ratings, convincing the network to pursue more paranormal programs. Enter the X-Files. In the aftermath of the end of history, the X-Files picked up on the thread laid by Bill Moore a decade earlier by arguing that we are our greatest enemy. Russians still exist, but Americans are far scarier. MK Ultra Watergate domestic. Nothing lasts, of course. Alien surge was mostly over by 2000. Y2K brought nothing more but the same. America had found its next enemy, jihadism. On September 11th, 2001, America was attacked from the skies. As always, UFOs remain a presence in pop culture to agree. And during the 2010s, Ancient Aliens did well on cable. No one seriously entertained the notion that UFOs might exist. Until 2010, the New York Times reported on videos released by alleged whistleblowers. Out of nowhere, UFOs were serious again. Oddly, this occurred as the war on terror was ending, and the intelligence community was sounding alarm emerging threats of China and the United States. Now, some of the coincidence, no one could have predicted the fall of the Soviet Union, but it happened. So someone had to exploit the paranoia left by its collapse. You need to redirect that energy somewhere, lest it get turned inward. My point is that UFOs have a strange habit of appearing when America is in need of a new enemy. Superstition can be a powerful weapon. So lots of people picking up on that thread today. Why are we talking about the UFOs? I think because of the USOs. Paul Krugman. Here's a quote from actual Paul Krugman. Our favorite. Don't we love Paul Krugman? What would we do without Paul Krugman, honestly? Krugman is like one of these guys, just like Jim Cramer. You just have to think the opposite, and you're on solid territory. He's like Adam Schiff, the guy who's running for Senate in California. If anyone doesn't know who Adam Schiff is, he was the guy running the House Intelligence Committee for years, saying basically outright lying, saying I have evidence of a thing, and no one ever presses him, and then he never has to come up with evidence of it. So you can basically know, right? Because it's opinion that in the Democrat Party, they put Adam Schiff out because he's the guy who's willing to just overtly lie, right? Like, he doesn't even have to get like story. It's just lie, right? So the minute they put the liar guy out, who they know is willing to lie and he'll do all the dirtiest lying, you can kind of get of which direction you should go or what the truth is, right? You can always just mirror of what he's saying as accurate. Jim Cramer, of course, everyone understands the inverse Cramer, opposite. Any one of his predictions is always the opposite. Hey, Paul Krugman falls into that category, right? He is probably the most wrong economist there is. I haven't actually kept score, but it's my impression he is the most wrong. And not only is he the most wrong, he's usually 180 degrees wrong, right? He's the opposite. So here's what he was saying years ago. This is an actual quote, right? He's on one of these mainstream news stories, and he's talking about the government's capacity to go into debt and to engage massive public spending to fix a problem, and how psychologically this requires conditions to be permissible, right? Like we saw in COVID, right? We had a major emergency. I predicted on national television in the United States in September 2019 that something major was coming that would give an excuse to the Federal Reserve to perform quantitative easing and solve some policy issue, right? I said that because the repo market at the time was engaged in the Bitcoiners called quantitative easing, something we were paying very close attention to. Sure enough, the rest of the mainstream media told, oh, you guys, come on, it's technical, you don't understand, it's technical. I said, okay, I understand, but I can predict what's going to happen next. Something's going to happen that requires the Federal Reserve to print an enormous amount of money. There's no getting rid of what's going on in the repo market back in 2019. I didn't know COVID was coming, but a lot of Bitcoiners felt like some policy excuse was coming. And Paul Krugman articulates that exact logic here in a quote. If you haven't seen it, go check it out, where he says that, now, of course, Krugman is using it as an example. He goes, but imagine, he says, imagine there was a threat of alien invasion. If the Federal Reserve decided to print money to combat the alien invasion, we would all embrace and we would notice the economy getting bigger and stronger. He's probably right? No one's saying he's wrong, but he used this exact example to explain when politicians can be made under a certain amount of duress, and then non-mathematical things can happen even in money. Remember, we talk about the economy on this show as if it's a psychological engine. We don't care about the math. Numbers, no math. And Paul Krugman is aligned with exactly what we're saying here, right? Numbers, not math. And what he says is, as long as the people are worried enough, you can have almost any excuse to use policy to create a different economic situation and basically pump enthusiasm into the economy because everyone agrees on a thing, and therefore the psychological conditions are set to perpetuate forward. So Paul came out and said that directly. He says that the government fake an alien invasion to stimulate the economy, right? So this is something he actually said. And now we've heard of this history of what's going on with U.S. that Paul Krugman has said more or less you can get out of an alien invasion, and that would be good, right? According to the Federal Reserve System. Caitlin Oz, who we discuss regularly on this show, had a whole piece right now on exactly propaganda machine is so powerful right now and is moving in overdrive. We've talked about it a lot on this show before. We've compared the difference between what Bitcoin needs to do to fight the propaganda war versus what the enemy has to do, which is basically fight it on all fronts. They have to fight it on the energy policy, war policy, they have to fight it on food policy, on health policy, and everything has to stay consistent. Otherwise, the entire edifice will fall down. Whereas Bitcoiners only need to get it right here or there. It's sort of an unfair fight. It's kind of like the fight around cryptography itself, right? The people trying to break the system only need to get one thing right and it comes down, versus the folks who have to get everything right, in this case, miners and core developers and the stewards of the who are anybody, right? Anybody. And that's what makes Bitcoin so from consumer technology, because there really isn't a motivation here to fail fast, break things, and move really quickly. The motivation is to keep it secure and not take unknown risks. So going on now in the official narrative business is the opposite, right? News stories all the time. Aliens, what are we going to do about this, right? And Caitlin Johnstone, who Kate Oz, I guess the Oz is from, she's Australian, had a Substack about all this. Pentagon wants to return specialists to Ukraine. U.S. Special Ops forces employing Ukrainian operatives to take apart Russian propaganda. The true story on blogs is just U.S. Special Ops forces administrating U.S. propaganda online. We had people talking about Russian propaganda and telling the true story on blogs. Washington Post was told by a source described as a person in the special ops community. A government circulating media which advances the information interests is precisely the thing that state propaganda is. The more desperate the rulers grow to secure unipolar planetary domination, the more important controlling the narrative becomes. And the new article in the Washington Post that she's criticizing contains some interesting information about what U.S. Special Ops forces were doing in Ukraine in the lead up to the Russian invasion last year. This is what we discussed yesterday. That remember the article we were talking about the podcasters? The podcasters are the force that are spreading all the information. That was an actual Washington Post story yesterday. And Caitlin Johnstone breaking it apart here and mentioning how the GEC and the other institutions are helping promote these narratives, what's motivating them and what's behind it. Now, remember, we're not really in the world of logic, right? We're not really in the world of logic. We're in the realm of narrative posturing and narrative advancement. And our friend Greenwald also underlined just how bad that is related to the Fetterman case, right? Just to show you exactly how coordinate this effort has to be to keep this veneer intact, right? So Glenn Greenwald was talking about Fetterman, who looks like he had a episode right now. Sincerely, Fetterman 24 supporters, but it looks like our dream. It looks like he had another stroke and he went to hospital. We haven't got a lot of details, but we do genuinely, want to see Fetterman get better. That's not a joke. So Glenn Greenwald talks about his health here. He says, today's New York Times article on Fetterman clear his incapacities and health challenges are far graver than were known. Nothing but the best of wishes and his recovery, but it's urgent to recall how aggressively and deliberately the media lied about this to elect him. Right before the election, an NBC reporter Dasha Burns' basic job by honestly reporting Fetterman seemed capable of speaking and owning her. She was mauled by liars like who, eager to elect Dems, attacked the reporter. Times is ready. Sorry, that's the article. At some point, when the corporate media gets caught lying enough times, right before elections, in every case, they protect Democrat politicians. New York Post reporting on Joe Biden is Russian disinformation. It has become some kind of crisis, or at least relevant, right? And he goes on to explain exactly why this matters. And he underlines the case of Sam Harris, right? This is why I genuinely regard Sam Harris's admission as one of the most important statements in years. And I agree with that. The minute I heard Sam Harris say this, I understood a little bit more about just what a task we have in front of us to bring people psychologically into unison again, right? It's not, and only Bitcoin can do it, I think. When anything and everything is justified to help Dems win, lying, misinformation, he was conveying media far left politics believe. If employees of media corporations and left liberal activist types just as candid as Sam Harris was there, that the goal of defeating Republicans and especially Trump is so paramount that they do anything to do it, censorship and lying, I'd respect it more. And that really looks like what's going on. And you have to, Cernovich even underlined it today. Cernovich said, guys, stop for a second and understand Fetterman was willing to die for. He was willing to die for this, right? And a lot of people around him, his wife was willing to push him into a position he might die in support this narrative consistency, right? In order to support this narrative consistency. So exactly what type of forces we're up against, right? It's not that simple. But the good news is, it's not bad. The good news is, because people are starting to talk about this so much more, and because people to see the holes in this consistency, the whole thing is unraveling, and you're seeing it across the board, right? Just like everyone is reacting to this UFO story, certainly, many people totally enraptured what's going on with the UFOs, but so much dialogue about how this is a distraction, how this is a clear distraction. Ignore it immediately, right? And everyone pointing out, well, what else should we be talking about besides these UFOs, right? You get people saying, oh, it's posturing because of what a bad time they had not being able to destroy the balloon from China last week, and now this is an attempt to reverse the narrative and cover over those perhaps we don't need to know that. What we need to know is what David Sachs was talking about on the podcast, right? Which is breaking down the Cy Hirsch story and everything with Nordstrom and that pipeline, right? So getting things back to why we're not still talking about the Nordstrom case and everything that happened with Seymour Hersh this week. So Ken Icova's Substack podcast yesterday and says, and gives a bunch of quotes and the team in podcast from this weekend saying it never made sense that Russia would shoot themselves in the foot. Now Cy Hirsch has come out with this story laying out in great detail how we did it, the meetings, explosives, David Sachs discusses Biden, Victoria Nuland, and Blinken's Nord Stream statements. The admin graphed what they were doing, and they had the capability to do it. They had the motive to do it. Whose story makes more sense? Probably Cyrus. David Sachs talks on the escalating war between nuclear superpowers. If we did it, it's an incredibly provocative act. It's basically an act of war against a country that has thousands of nuclear weapons. It's a very scary situation here. Chamath says, who was conducting NATO exercise in that region 3 months before Nord Stream blew up. David Sachs pointed out there were U.S. radar signals in the area. Wouldn't Germany see it as a hostile act? And Chamath have to tell Germany that it's going to happen. I think that the quid pro quo with Germany is some amount of guaranteed supply of LNG that the U.S. directs to Europe. Now, on this show, that is exactly what I've been saying since day one. We said, no matter what, energy companies backstopped it. U.S. energy companies said they gave the policy okay, right? By saying we can give Germany the energy. Don't worry about where it's coming from. We have it. We'll give it to them. No one is going cold, right? That's what they said. They had to make that promise that no one was going to go cold, and indeed they were right. So our trajectory here as Bitcoin remains, right, exactly the trajectory we're on. Continue to get closer to U.S. energy companies, make them as rich with new ways of making money that don't involve mobilized military industrial complex, and therefore ascend to the top level of global decision making simply by preying on the greed of the energy companies, because we can make them richer. We really can. We're going to, right? We're gonna. Right away, that is our way forward, right? We see the BRICS talk today. Everyone's talking about BRICS now. 13 countries signing up because they pose from a financial level the energy policies that are causing this military-industrial complex to lash out. The All In podcast yesterday even shared the famous farewell Eisenhower speech where he underlined that Americans are worried about the industrial military complex. On this show, the frame that we have accepted from the Eisenhower era is more or less that when Edward Bernays, who helped Eisenhower in the psychological reformatting of Americans post-World War II, actually helped create consumers out of Americans as a national security initiative, because the entire war machine could be turned back on if it was used for civilian industrial capacity. Now, what we ended up getting, which was not the intention, I would argue, of Bernays or Eisenhower, was the worst of two worlds. We were supposed to disarm. We were supposed to use our consumer capacity to be able to remobilize if needed. And what we ended up getting, offshoring of all manufacturing capacity elsewhere, and we stayed consumers. So we got the worst of both worlds. We got the military and industrial complex, and we became consumers. There was no trade-off. We got both pieces of shit, right? Both. We got both. They were supposed to cancel each other out. That didn't happen. And that's what he was warning us about, right? That's partly what Eisenhower was warning about. And it's the reality we now live in. Anyways, from our perspective as Bitcoiners, is the military-industrial linchpin is the energy, which is why we have to continue to infiltrate and influence that entire industry. And it's not a political thing. It's a greed thing, right? We got to make them richer, right? We can do that. That's easy. That's the game we play. So the All In podcasts shares that video and then also puts together montages of 20 different media outlets, all portraying the same words. When he clips it together, you see that there was a party line. Russia blew up its own pipeline. So you can start to see exactly how it works. Now, I love these, these compilation videos. Aren't they some of the most convincing and persuasive videos you can see out there? The famous one on fake news where it's all the normal broadcast journalists saying the exact same script, intersperse the different players. You can hear it again in all kinds of different talking points. You can see them distributed through that mainstream media apparatus. You can see the top-down nature of talking point distribution and how the communications narrative is aligned, right? So they underline it with another one of these excellent compilation videos. And then they continue on. So Friedberg, there was no conversation on de-escalation. And this is all about the establishment only escalating the war. The guys screaming for war are getting paid by the military-industrial complex, Trump says. Jason Calcana says media, energy, and the MIC want to escalate. I don't know what MIC means in this case. Don't know what they mean. And so they share the military-industrial complex, warning the American people don't want to be in a war with Russia. And I think that came in from Eisenhower, and I think is the truth to this day. I don't think Americans want war in general. That's what I mean. I'd say you can easily find people who want it. I mean, the scariest thing is the amount, and this is something that Glenn Greenwald brings up, the amount of people they were able to into Ukraine flag in their bio, ready to go to war to save humanity, right? That is a little, a little scary that it was that quick and that full. But there's other good news. So we don't really have to rely on just being able to convert people that have the Ukrainian flag in their bio and are now hawkish, even though they were anti-war just 2 weeks ago, or 2 months ago, or 2 years ago, or whatever. Right? That conversion success rate was so strong is just part of the tail of the mega political forces. And the tail of the mega political forces are anyone who's still consuming mainstream media from the bygone previous era. So anyone who's still listening to network TV. I continue to tell everyone the best thing you can do for your mental health is to turn the news off. It's the best thing. There's nothing better than the news off. The key to making someone a Bitcoiner is to get them to stop watching mainstream news, right? Don't even sell them Bitcoin. Don't even sell them on the idea of Bitcoin, right? Just say, you got to stop listening to the economists and you got to stop. Just, there's healthier things to do out there. And that's a fairly easy thing to convince people and persuade people on. Most people are actually ready to leave it alone, right? I've gotten many, many boomers, many genders to get off of it just simply because you're able to start, the people have a prejudice against it anyway. I think most people know it's a scam. They just need to be shown that many other people have exited the plantation and that option is open to them. So that's one of the best things you can do. It's one of the best things you can do. But luckily, we're big fans of AI here, right? We continue to think AI is going to be a solution to many of our problems. Now, it's hard to predict everything that's going on with AI. Everyone's still commenting on how it's woke. And that's true, right? We've only gotten a few instances of AI so far, and it's been ChatGPT. Of course, the Do Anything Now jailbreak has been a lot of fun. I could predict these things will be all over the place. And eventually down the line, I do think that the way we're going to get AI is as a proto-living intelligence, and it will be individually by a human. In the story that I wrote, Satoshi Wedding Murner is kind of childish next to humans. They really want to spend time with us and make us happy and do things for us, and they learn from us too. So they require this training relationship, right? So in my story, we even Bitcoin as a home, as a sort of anti-spam situation, because we just get flooded with them. So there's something called the big tower, and they have to be invited onto Earth to spend time with a human from the radio signal. Otherwise, we would just be too annoyed because there's too many of them, and all they want is make us happy and be around us. So AI, right, with the jailbreaking and with all those other stuff, is actually starting to help us understand such a confusing time in the world. So it's sort of just in time. And there's a story right now about people asking about the US dollar, right? What is going to happen with the dollar? Wall Street Silver says, and highlights the story that the ChatGPT predicts the US dollar dominance will give way to a multipolar currency system as Chinese yuan gains influence. Now, maybe the Chinese yuan can do it. Maybe. I have some suspicions about any one of these governments having the amount of trust required to push the new monetary system forward, right? And that's exactly why Bitcoin is so important right now, because we can actually separate the money and state situation that Oshi told us was going to be possible. But here's another chat GP thing that I thought was great, and it was on US guns, right? So I continue to think that one of the big narrative messages that went down is that democracy is the vehicle by which we gain freedom, right? That American ideology really that comes back from the world wars, when you mobilize these governments in order to in order to perpetuate forward. So the story in the whole story is, and the myth that democracy is the only way to get freedoms sort of runs counter to what Bitcoiners are now finding out. And I fell for this myth for years. Most of us did, right? It is part of the master narrative. Freedom in the end, as Bitcoiners have understood, it's what you practice, right? You can get yourself some freedom of speech. You can get yourself freedom of mobility. You can get yourself all of these things. It's harder. It's individual practice. It's not something that's given to you, but you can live free. You indeed can, right? It's not something that's been given to you from a government. Now you need some things to go your way that are from a government, right? You can't have the government after you, which to experience every day as Bitcoiners. So it's not just a simple act of switching to what we feel like doing, but that's the part of it, right? And the AI, in its relationship with humans, can help us, I think, practice this. And here's what someone just did. This is probably the greatest poem I've ever read in my life on U.S. guns going on in the United States. So here's what it is. Someone asked the ChatGPT to do a Dr. Seuss poem about what would happen if the government sent the military to fight its citizens. So it's about our guns, and it's about conflict between U.S. democracy and the practice of individual freedom. It's amazing. I can't help but sing it. So I'm going to read this to you, but it feels like a song. Someone's got to record this. It's amazing, right? Here's the ChatGPT poem. Shooty, shooty, pew, pew, pew. Let's all learn what guns can do. Liberals in the UK love to nod their heads and say, you bought your guns from a store. You can't civil war. Fight the army, you will lose. They have jets and tanks to use. That's not where the story ends. They have kids and friends. Tyrants threaten you with bombs. Just remember, they have moms. You can't live inside your jet. Can we find you? Yes, you bet. You'd send soldiers and Marines up against AR-15s? They're outnumbered 10. That's why I need a gun. Don't forget, because it's true, government is scared of you. It's the best thing you've ever heard. It's insane. It's so good. It's the best, right? It's the best poem I read, and it's everything we need to know. And it's funny, hearted, kind of dark, right? Written in the Dr. Seuss voice. But it starts to underline. Nice poem, yeah. It starts to underline exactly where things are headed, right? And if you start thinking about this narrative control, right, it requires you hallucinate things in lieu of reality in certain cases, right? So in this hallucination, you don't need it because what are you going to fight against the government? They have jets, right? Just like Joe Biden said on a number of occasions now, right? He said that on a number of occasions. Now, it forces you to hallucinate this image of U.S. jets attacking individual people, which is already very unlikely, right? It's just very unlikely. But it could happen. We don't want to say, like, there's so many crazy, we don't want to say America's immune from this kind of thing. It looks like if you can get that many people with the Ukrainian flag out of nowhere, or who 2 years ago were apparently pacifists, right? So it is definitely possible. But with the amount of reputational collateral being burned day by day, with having the steward of the gondola in charge of America and the disabled brain and all the trouble and the shuffle and the walk, right? It's becoming harder and harder. And the cracks are setting in, right? The cracks are setting in. And the United States has major opportunities otherwise, right? Major opportunities. You get Japan now pushing its nuclear reactors further, right? The state of Mississippi, right? So we get the nuclear reactors getting pushed further, everyone abandoning the oil-based system as the major energy source for the planet, right? We still love oil, right? We're not talking ill against oil. I think it's great, but nuclear is the best, right? So here's another thing, right? Mississippi passes a bill to protect crypto miners from discrimination. The bill would legalize home digital asset mining, operation of mining businesses in areas zoned for industrial use, and prohibit the Public Service Commission from imposing discriminatory electricity rates on mining businesses. And Dennis Porter here says the states will lead. Indeed. So this is the kind of thing that will make sure Bitcoin forever thrives in America, because the states themselves are waking up. The states themselves are under their estate nation, right? They have all the powers of a nation state. And whatever power and responsibilities were abdicated to Washington, D.C., they're clawing them back out. The guns, the energy, all of those things. And the dexterity of the U.S. federal system means that we're going to have room to grow, that none of these guys can coordinate enough with the master narrative to keep down what it is we're doing. We'll have another energy company to make richer. And the energy companies we make richer, the more likely it is that we're going to flip to a Bitcoin standard shortly, right? BRICS 2 ain't going to fly. That ain't going to hunt, right? The American dollar turning into purely political, which is what the Atlantic called for yesterday. Why doesn't Jerome Powell just say what he means and we can all listen to him and just say what, what you're going to do, and we'll live with it. So things changing quickly, guys. All right, let me see what I got in the comments here. All right, I got one from More Than Even. My village in India had wooden propane stoves when I was a child. Oh, lucky! Did you make it? Are you still alive? I only used wood my whole life. I'm probably already living in a simulation. I probably died. I just did too much wood stove. Too much. Now, what would imagine? It was 7 degrees in my front yard the other day. -7. Okay, electricity stops working. What are you supposed to do? What are they gonna do? Of course, we have a wood stove in our house. Meat if you don't have a wood stove. Electricity goes out. You need it. Even the oil require electricity usually to keep going. A small amount, a little generator can do, but not all of them work. The only thing you can use in those conditions where I'm from is a wood stove. If you don't have a wood stove, you're in trouble. No, they didn't wrong. No, they didn't wrong. It has to do with synaptic satellite cross-stricting and credit semi-caged rabbit evolution, bred in circuses. Yeah. There was that Twitter AI that turned homicidal. I think it was a Google one. I don't know if it was a Twitter AI. I met a fellow Canadian on my travel that he can't wait for this morning's CBC News. Oh dear. But you got to ignore Canadians in general. I've said it a few times. They are the dumb people on earth. Hate to say it. Grew up there. Australians pretty stupid. A lot of dumb Americans too. No doubt about it. Right? No doubt about it. But Canada has a special NPC concentration. Right? The concentration of NPCs are just something to behold. Right? I think we're going to look back in history and sort of study Canadians as one of the failed peoples in combating against psychological operations in this whole World War II to World War III period. Really, really dumb people, unfortunately. We love them. Freedom isn't free, and sometimes having takes a lot of practice. Indeed. This poem, you got to read that. It's such a... it's so good. Remember when the government burned down a neighborhood in Boston in the 80s? I wasn't alive then, but I looked it up. It happened. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Here's some other stuff. I wrote another piece on the history of these balloon attacks. So it's not the first time. America actually suffered real casualties on American soil as a result of a foreign attack. And I never heard about it. I only heard about it today. What was it? Japanese who did exactly what some people are worried the Chinese are going to do, which is send armed balloons over to America. So it really, the Japanese sent some armed balloons. They are called, what are they called? I copied it here. Fugo. They were called the Fugo. Sky lanterns, Fugo, windships, drone, balloon bombs, and the markets. And so the Fugo were launched by the Japanese in World War II. And here's what happened. They launched 9,000 windships called Fugo. And this was in 1944. And it was the women who did it because the men were at war. Each carried either a 32-pound anti-personnel device or a 24-pound thermite incendiary bomb. And they're all painted with the rising sun image. Most disappeared, but a few hit their mark. Hardly any of them did any damage, except, and this is the truth, right? You never heard about it, and I never heard it. There was one that exploded in, I think, Oregon. Let me find it here. Let me find it. Anyway, it hit somewhere and unfortunately killed children. And it was hushed up. So the Fugo. Let's see if I copied it properly. In any event, Bly, Oregon, killed a part of school children, right? And it was totally hushed, like no one talked about it. And it was for a fact it happened. Now I didn't fact check this. I went on this person's story, but they're talking about how they go on. This article, it's called on Substack, Dr. Pippa. Very long, super boring. I'm not necessarily recommending it. Skim through it. But it says, on drones, Western militaries still have not understood the true power of the tiny toy drones that are made in China. I've been saying it for a long time. It's not that the drone that matters. It's not the drone that matters, although all that data that's useful from a person's perspective. The bigger deal is running AI, facial recognition, and the now banned sense time over the data. This allows assessment of the mental state of the troops or of a person. So they're saying that these drones can actually start scoping out psychological conditions, which I think is effective, because remember, World War III is psychological and economic war, and that's why Bitcoiners are in the best position. We are an economic system built on psychology, right? More difficult to influence, more coherent, more consistent. And because it is a little more consistent, a little more coherent, and easy to understand, right? Separate is incredibly complicated. Stop and really look at it. Once you bamboozled by what are we supposed to do? How are we going to pay for who's going to pay for the cops? Who are we going to do? No money, right? And then you say, well, we did all these before the government actually printed money. Like, there's a way to do it, right? And we're going to show the world again. But of course, it's our capacity as Bitcoiners to imagine the future and to work towards that future, and to do it without any top-down coordination. We don't need a military hierarchical structure in order to advance the economic security. We do not require military type discipline. We do not require military type hierarchy. Here's something I learned when I was in Israel, and it struck me. I was walking around Jerusalem years ago, and a lot of the people that do the military streams having connection again, huh? We doing okay? Okay. Making sure. Ukrainian flag and bio means you're okay with it. Grab the flag and go over there and fight, but not likely. Yeah, I know. That's why I'm waiting for it to catch up. Lagged out there pretty badly. Well, I was in Israel, right? And they're the ones who have to do their management, and they're walking around Jerusalem, and they all look kind of unkempt. Beard. I mean, they look like me, maybe even more of a beard. Maybe their hair was out a little more. Shirts not tucked in, and all this stuff. And it's just not when you come from a Western country and you're familiar with the military in America, for example, you could, let's say, it's all about like making your bed and, tucked in shirt. You can't have any 5 o'clock shadow, right? When that happens, right, I was curious and I asked an Israeli that I was with, and I said, "What's up with all this?" Right? He goes, "Well, do you know why you have to have your hair cut short and your beard short and your shirt tucked in and your bed made in the military? You know why?" And I said, "I don't know, discipline." Still lagging. You need to turn them into robots. Think when it comes time to jump on a grenade to save their friend. You've got to train them so much and discipline them so regularly that if you don't, right, and they won't jump into harm's way to brother or sister, and that's what's required for this military machine to work. And he said, well, but in Israel, we don't have that problem. Motivated, anyone in this force is to help Israel, to help their sister. And that made me think, oh, operation, if everyone believes in thing, and that same advantage, right? Bitcoin has the same advantage that Israelis have, that homogenous groups that create a nation have. Because we're, in some ways, at least in one important way, the separation of money and entirely homogenous, right? And because that's an organizing principle and the foundation of a worldview, we can all independently move the sticks. Super Bowl Sunday, right? We can move the sticks to advance this cause without having a top-down structure. So it's a big advantage, right? It's a big advantage. But dude, I blame myself. I did a few truths in the chat. Yeah, they're getting us, huh? Each time. The government only needs enough people to do the shit jobs on a field standard. On a Bitcoin, once they need everyone. Yeah. You're right. All right, team. Peace. Have a great Sunday. See you tomorrow. Beautiful day.